In these next series of videos, we're going to be taking a look at how we can build 2D art that can be pulled into Unreal Engine 4 to build a 2D game. The concept behind this is really taking 2D art and building kind of 2.5D puppets out of the artwork that we're making, and then setting that up in a kind of very shallow 3D environment inside the game engine to get different kind of depth and parallax and scrolling within those environments. So let's go ahead and get started and take a look at some of the art inside of Photoshop. Okay, inside of Photoshop, this is a file that I created that is going to help guide me make all the different art that I need that's actually going to be pushed into the game. So the first thing I'm kind of worried about is actually just defining the overall style of what it is that this game is going to be, and setting up the characters. I've got some on-screen controls for if it's going to be on a tablet. We've got a scoring system and any of the other icons that we might need inside of the game. The other thing I'm going to talk to you about is setting up some things that can kind of sell depth, and seeing things that I've been observing in different games that seem to work pretty well for getting a really nice kind of parallax where these pieces in here are going to move at a different rate than what you see here on the floor, and then these things here in the what I'm going to consider the extreme foreground are going to move at a different rate than things like the mountains back here. And it gives a nice sense of depth by doing that. But again, all this is set up in a way to where I can kind of get my best guess of what the final frame will look like in the game engine. So there's a few things that I'm doing in here to set that up. So you can see we've got an area that I called a screen safe, and this is basically set up in an aspect ratio. If I hold on control and click on the mask that you see on here for this, this is set up in this ratio to be 1920 by 1080. That my final destination is going to be on a PC. Could potentially go over to the tablet as well, but that's what I'm kind of shooting for right now, is a full HD 1920 by 1080. So I've given myself that this really kind of thin line that you see on here. The way that I did that, I really like using solid colors. So if you go down here and create a solid color, you can make one of these. With the solid color created, you can go through and you can always change the color of whatever that thing is. I'm going to hit cancel on that. I just have it set to black because what I did was I actually took the fill and put it to 0. I can drag that thing up and I can kind of darken this area that you see in here if I want with that fill. And we also have an overall opacity, so if I drag the opacity to 100%, you can see we can do that. Now the fill works a little bit different, where if I've got any kind of effects on here, I can take the fill down like this, and you can see it's going to kind of get rid of whatever that fill is. I can take it off all the way completely, and it'll leave whatever effects that I have on there. So I'm going to take that down to 0. I think this was back down maybe 20% or something like that, somewhere in that neighborhood. And this is what was going on for this. So if I just right click on here and we go to blending options, so it looks like that's going to go off screen for you just a little bit, but again, you just right click on there and you go to the blending options that are on the top. I actually have a stroke put on here, and then I've got a size for how thick the stroke is going to be, and also choosing the color, and I just chose white like that. So that's what's setting up this this safe area. My thought is that this is the main area that you see within the camera, and then the camera has the possibility to maybe possibly raise a little bit, maybe lower a little bit, maybe lag behind the character this way or this way, and we should still be getting this kind of view in here, which with the larger kind of layout. Okay, so I'm going to turn that off. The other thing that I know within UE4, it's possible to do a vignette with their post-process node. So I can turn that off, and you can see how much that really kind of changes the way everything kind of looks for the art. The vignette really kind of makes you kind of focus in your eye kind of in this area, so I really kind of like it, and I think it kind of adds a little bit more mood and some kind of depth to that. So that is just another solid color layer, and you can see the color that I have on here. The layer type on this one is set to multiply, so it's going to multiply and darken based off of this color on here. And then with the solid colors, you get these masks for free, which is kind of cool. So if I hold down Alt and click on the mask, you can see this is what's masked out in here. And I just used a gradient. Went to the gradient tool and did a radial gradient, and then used this one here that does whatever this primary or this first color is that fades to transparency. So you can just click and drag out and do a gradient that way. I'll just hold down Alt and click back on there to get back to that place. So that's how the vignette was set up. I'll go ahead and turn that off. And then I'm going to start talking about the different components that made this thing up. So I'm just going to hide everything, and we'll start off with the background. I've got a whole group that has interface on here. So I've got just, you can see I'm starting with pure black, and that's a solid color as well, so I could change the color for that. And I'll turn on this whole layer group for the sky. So layer groups are awesome. You can just make a new folder here, and you can just throw all these different components within there, and you can also group things within a layer group, and I do that quite a bit. So I could just turn off that whole group, and it's going to turn off my clouds and my sun and the sky gradient that I've got set up. So we'll look at these one at a time. So I'm starting with this base layer with a gradient, and again using solid color layers. And the reason I'm using these is because I can always go back and just double click on this thing, and I could change the color of the sky if I wanted for the gradient. I'm going to hit undo real quick. Just want to keep the colors I got. And so this is another solid color over the top of it that you see that gives it this kind of gradient going right in through here. And we've already looked at how to take the mask and then do a gradient on there. I'm going to hold down Alt and click on it so you can see exactly what was made for the mask. This time, instead of using a radial gradient, this was used a linear gradient. So if this whole thing was filled with white, I can take this color black and I can drag down. I can actually hold down Shift and drag down, and it'll do the gradient that way to make sure it's nice and straight. So that was what was created for this gradient here that gives this color over the top of that. The next thing I have in here is just a sun, and again I'll open this up, and you can see again I'm using these different solid color layers. Just the reason for that is just so I can change the colors really easily on this thing. So I got kind of this red outer soft kind of glow, and then little orange and yellow, and then going more towards hot white and through there. And so that's what makes up the sun. I'll turn on the clouds, and what I did for these, let me show you these one at a time. So like this is the first layer of clouds, and within this group we've got the same kind of thing going on where we've got this overall kind of color for the shape of the clouds. If I hold down Alt and click on this, you can see what was actually painted into that mask, something like that. And then we'll come back, and then I did another yellowish color, and that just fits over the top of it and gives it this nice kind of rim on top of the clouds like that for that. And then within these layer groups, which is kind of cool, you can just add a layer mask even to the groups itself. So this will make more sense when I show this one here. So I didn't want the clouds back here to overlap or interfere with these clouds through here. So you can see I basically painted a mask in these areas to make sure that I could paint whatever I wanted for the clouds and it wouldn't interfere with this thing below. Now it's possible you can hold down Shift and then you can click on that mask to temporarily turn it off. So you can see here's exactly what was painted for this layer of clouds. And if I turn this one on, you can see how it kind of doesn't blend together, and I want it to feel like these clouds are sitting in front of here. But I'm trying to build the art in a way where when I'm done with this, I can chop this art up and put it into the game engine. So I need to keep this stuff all kind of separate, and so this kind of workflow works really well for being able to get a final look like this and not destroy the art in any kind of way by erasing certain areas. If we turn these off, and you can see my clouds are missing here, and it's because I put a a mask on here. If I hold on shift and then click on that, you can see the cloud's still there. It's just being hidden by this mask that's in this area like this. So I'll turn the rest of the clouds back on. So that's the sky. If we turn that off and we take a look at the mountains that I'm currently working on, I'm actually making a different sheet that has more variation with the mountains. And so after I created this and kind of got some of this depth kind of going with a little bit of different blur on here, I threw this on a page that's 4096 by 4096. If that's too big and I need to change the size later, it won't be a big deal. I can do that later. But if I hit Control H, I built guides for this. Building guides is pretty easy. If I hit Control R, that's going to bring up my rulers, and you can click and drag out in this area, and you can make it a new guide. And if you have it on the move tool, you can always grab those things back and move them. I'll just push it back off to get rid of it. But I was snapping to the center here, and then I made a selection like this right here after I made a guide here, and then here, then made a selection with the marquee tool right in through here, kind of like this. And when I did that, it allowed me to snap to the middle of that selection. So I made this line here, did the same thing over here, and then was able to build these lines here. So I'm just trying to give myself some kind of layout for this is going to be a mountain type, this one. So I've got 4 different types, and if I zoom in on this, I'll hit Control plus. You can see there's a blurring effect on this set here, and I'll be using these as the mountains that are further back, and it kind of helps sell some kind of illusion that there's a little bit more depth in there. Okay, so let's just continue on here, and I'll hide these, and then I've got these mid kind of cliffs that I built. And again, when I'm done with this and I like kind of the look of this, I'm going to have to start cutting maybe this chunk out here, this chunk here, this, maybe this here, something like this. And I'm going to break these up into different kind of rock pieces that will become kind of like these 2D modular assets, where in the game engine I'll be able to take these rocks and kind of rearrange them, kind of rotate them a little bit, scale them up and down just a little bit, maybe flip them horizontally here and there, and then that way I can build variation of this this layer in here and kind of have kind of these 2D Lego blocks to kind of play with. So that's the plan anyways. The ground, so the ground is you know, kind of like what we were looking at before. I forgot to mention that the only thing that's really different about these is at the very top I've got line work that's black and white, and so you can see I have another solid color layer, just made it black, and then you know, within the mask I'm just painting in certain lines to give this color underneath. So I'm getting the color, and I'm getting the line work to kind of, it's kind of comic book-ish, I would say. Now this one's a little bit different. This solid color layer that I have here, if we look at the mask for it, I painted the mask first, and within this mask it contains all the artwork, and nothing can extend past this. And the reason why that's happening is because I've linked all the layers above to this layer here. So because this layer only draws where it's showing white, and then the rest of it's transparent, and I've linked these, anytime I paint, even if I've painted a gradient or whatever, and it goes out past this, you'll never see it because it kind of locks it to the transparency of this layer here underneath. And it's pretty easy to link the layers. You can hold down Alt with your cursor right on this line in here, and you can see how it brings up this little thing here, so you can unlink it like this. So now you can see what's going on, and my art is going past this thing here. Now if I link it back, hold down Alt and just click, you see it kind of locks it to that. I'll do the next one to this one here, and I'll do the line work on there as well. Now the other thing I have, if I hide the background, the reason why it's got an outline around this whole thing here is because I did that blending option like what we looked at before. So I'll try to come here and say blending option like that, and you can see I've got a stroke, and then this one's set to the inside, so it strokes on the inside of this thing here, and it's just a width of 3, so it gives it that black outline around the outer part of it like that. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and turn on that black part for the background again, and this is where I'll turn everything on and kind of show you how it starts to layer together. Okay, and again, the art's all built in a way where when I'm done with this, I'll be able to kind of chop it up and have a good idea that everything's working together, and there shouldn't be too much tweaking inside of like the game engine part of it. The other thing I'm doing is now we've got this layer here where I'm making this little caveman guy, and he's in a layer, and what I did was I have a shadow for him, so it's not very descript on there for what was painted for that. Hold down Alt and click on that, and then I have the art for him, which I made into a smart object. So if you right click on here and you can convert to smart object or a new smart object, you'll see it around in there somewhere. It even works if you have, let's say we've got a big group like this with this boulders thing that I've got here. If I right click on there and say convert to smart object, it would convert this whole group that I have into this thing like what you see here, and it flattens everything down into this. It looks like one kind of layer, but what's really cool about it is if I double click on it, it'll actually open up that art in a separate document, and I can tweak this thing away at that point. So in this document, I've got the folder structure for the caveman, and he's got all his different coloring on him and line work and everything else like that. So I try to be fairly good about what I was naming on there. I saw I got like one group that's not named so well, and that's like the hair for this thing. So it's cool. I can just change this group name, call it hair, and then I save it, and it'll update over here. But you're not really going to see any kind of change now. If I did something like this, where I'll make a new layer, and let's just make a very obvious color. We'll do red, and we'll give him, let's see, we'll put on this pencil and just color this in. Sorry, that pencil has an actual color associated with it, so I'll just draw right in here, and we could do something like give him some body paint or something like that, right? And then I'll just save it, and you'll see after it's saved, it'll push that change over to this thing here, right? And if I don't like it, so get rid of it, save it, and you'll see that change get pushed over there again. So it's really cool it's basically, these are nested files within a big Photoshop file. And what it allows you to do is, with this smart object, I don't know how much you've played around with blurring things and stuff like that with these filters, but those things can be destructive, which means like you can't go back and change them. But if you have a smart object, you can do like a Gaussian blur, and I'll push this over here so we can take a look at it. So I'll go ahead and hit OK for that, and you can see it makes this smart filter over here. We can show that or hide it by hitting this thing here. You can turn the thing on and off, and if you don't like the value of it, you can always come back here and you can tweak it, and so that thing is non-destructive at that point. So that's a pretty cool feature to have on there. I'm gonna just select this thing. I'm gonna right click on here and say delete smart filters. Get rid of the mask, and I'm just going to clear the smart filter. So I'm getting rid of all that. So I have these hidden. I didn't show these, but I'm making something like a boulder, and maybe these kind of power-up eggs that you'll be able to get. So those are on there, and then the dinosaur is kind of built the same way that the caveman is built out. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this guy in just a little bit and kind of his setup, because he's a little bit more complicated, and I'll show how to take the art on this and how we have to kind of think about this and separating it out. Let's take a look at the extreme foreground, and again, those are elements that are just going to be very, very close to the camera. So I'm thinking that there's two different value types that are almost silhouetted out, right? So these are pretty light, you can still kind of see it, but the things that are even closer to you are getting darker, at least with this lighting scenario where the light is back here from the character, and so it's getting darker as it gets closer to the camera. And again, this effect doesn't look all that great until we combine that with the vignette, and then it kind of darkens some of this stuff up. So that's how this whole thing has been kind of created. And let me just turn back on the screen save thing. One other thing that I did, I had a template that I used from UE4. So one of the first things I did was take their side scroller and immediately get some of my art in there and trying to get an understanding of what the overall scale is going to be for this. So I think my dinosaur character is just he's a little bit smaller than maybe what I've got going on in the camera in there, but this is really the layout that I'm kind of shooting for, so I might have to readjust the camera in UE4 a little bit, but this at least helped me kind of understand maybe where I wanted these this character to be, the dinosaur character that I created, and how large it should be. So I think this depth right here of this one is really the one that I'm kind of targeting, even though this blue character is going to be replaced with my dinosaur character, so that's why he's sitting right there in that location. But I really like kind of this scale of this one here. So I'll go ahead and hide that template like that. And interface, we could talk about that real quick. So again, these are just more elements that were created, and it was put in this kind of layer group thing, and it was broken down into some things for movement. You can see under movement I've got what I'm considering a jump, and then maybe a crouch, and then this is going to make the player maybe run faster. And each one of these were smart objects as well. So if I go into this, and you can see I have this kind of set up for the colors and everything else like that. So any of the art for this could be changed on here, and then it would update on these different pieces that I have and through there. All right, let's look at the art for the main character here. So this was set up kind of similar in its own separate document, and this was like the first thing that I created. It was just creating the main character, but I just had a very simple background in here just to give some colors and see how this thing was reacting color-wise to maybe some kind of background. And so if I turn that thing off, you can see this is just the art for that. So nothing specific about that, just mainly for me kind of painting. And so then I painted this whole thing up, and I've got shadows separated out, his colors like this, some of the lighting information, which I was mainly using with gradients. And so you can see there's a darkening effect on this thing with a gradient, and I used a solid color on there. You can see if I clicked on this, it's set to multiply, so it just adds a darkening effect with a gradient from there. So there's that. And I was also considering something that I was calling a bounce light, which adds a little bit of light that is going to bounce off the ground and then hit up on the character like this. This one's set to screen for the blending type, and then that's going to add light to it. And you can see I'm trying to add just like a little bit of color to that. And then this is what was painted in those sections. It's really soft like that. And so that's some of the lighting, and then over the top of all that is the line work. But again, I put that outer stroke on one of the layers on here to give that outer kind of thickness of the line work in conjunction with this line work that I have. Now when I built the line work, I kind of knew I wanted to keep things kind of separate. So I can show you the tongue. The tongue is hidden. You know, when the jaw comes open, then you actually see the tongue. But I kept all this line work like this, where, let's look at it. So we have the body lines, and I think before I even started, I had just kind of a sketch, which I can pump that up a bit more. So you can see here's what was kind of sketched out, and then over the top of that, line work was created. And so I have these lines for the body, right? Because I know I need to get the body separate with this part of the head. When you see the tongue, you're going to have it kind of in that position here. Here's the line work for the jaws, and then these front legs and the back legs, arms in the front, arms in the back, and then you know, when all that's combined together, it gives you the total of all the line work. And the reason I separated this stuff out like this is because I knew I was going to be pushing things to a sheet like this. This is the end goal for me, to get this character broken apart in this kind of way where you know, we can start assembling these things as the puppet that you kind of just saw in the intro of the video. But we need to have these things separated out, because this part of the leg is going to go right up in here, so that gets moved over the top of this thing here, and then this part of the leg goes back behind this thing just a little bit, and so this is always in front of it, and it kind of bends, you know, right about in here. And same thing for these arms. These arms are going to go around in this area. And so since I'm taking these legs and these arms and I'm rotating them, I never know exactly where they're going to fall, so I have to finish out the art in this area as if this leg could rotate right around and through here. Same thing for the jaw, so the jaw is going to get moved up in here, and the rotation point somewhere around in here, and then whenever that's set up, the jaw is able to kind of come open a little bit. Now I'm still kind of playing around with some of these shapes here, where we've got these different things for eyeballs and different eyebrows, and getting those to kind of turn on and off by changing the depth. If this eyeball is sitting in front of this one, then it kind of overrides that thing. Still kind of playing around with that a little bit. It does seem to be working, but not exactly probably what I'm looking for. So I might be looking for another solution where instead of just swapping out an eye and an eyebrow, it might just swap out an entirely different head or something like that. So you can see this whole thing is, like I said, to get to this point where everything's flattened down and everything's transparent on a background, because we're going to use the alpha of this thing to knock out any kind of shading in the game engine. So it'll be just kind of like what you see here. Everything's put onto these this geometry and these cards, and that isn't drawn because of the alpha. But we're basically, think about drawing on a piece of paper, and you take scissors and you cut out these shapes with scissors, and then you could kind of, you know, put little attachment points on each one of these things, and you would be able to get that little paper puppet to kind of animate. That's basically the end goal for us for where we're going with this stuff. So in the next video, we're going to be taking a look at how we take this art, we take it into Maya, we're going to make all of our different shapes and make geometry around all this stuff, get everything chopped apart, and then arrange it with depth to where we're actually getting things set up as our 2D puppet. And then after that, we'll be looking at how to take a skeleton and put a skeleton in it and start adding animation to this thing.